Studios. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to the listeners.
Now, I've often heard it being said by many parents that ever since labantwana banama rights, they're out of line. If you hit them, they can take you to jail, that these rights are actually spoiling the children. But I want to know from you, how far do we take corporal punishment without infringing on the child's right?
I think we need to clarify right from the beginning that children's rights are human rights. So we are not necessarily bringing something different or something out of the sky, because children are humans, so they also have rights. And what we say, with those rights come responsibilities as well. So when it comes to corporal punishment within the family home, we are saying, really, as parents, as caregivers, we need to think about what are we teaching our children when we hit them, and what messages are we sending to our children.
When speaking about teenage children, is there any truth to the concerns that some parents have that these rights have now spoiled the children? They know they can get out of line because there's no punishment that they'll receive from the parent, and if there is any punishment, that they can get their parents arrested. So is there any merit to that concern that these rights are actually working against discipline?
I think for some time the emphasis was very much on children's rights, to a point that, as you say, parents felt that we are taking their rights away from them. But now we have shifted to a point where we are balancing children's rights with their responsibilities. And then when it comes to what is happening within the family home, yes, to some extent, if a parent hits a child to a point that there are marks and there is bodily harm, that needs to be reported. Not necessarily because the parents will be arrested, but there is a recognition that it means there are challenges, that parents are facing some difficulties in terms of disciplining that young person, and that the family as a unit, they need support in terms of what is going on and how else can the situation or issues be addressed within a family home. Because when matters are reported to us as Childline, and I would assume other organizations, including government departments, it's not necessarily that we will run to the court process and arrest and convict parents, but we look at what support is required as the first port of call. And then if things don't change over time, of course, and the child and the young person continues to be at risk, then we need to look at other alternatives.
That's very true, especially in a country such as ours. We know that the majority of parents are very loving and in fact do try to discipline their children with love. But then we have the other side of the coin, where abuse against children and the vulnerable is so rampant in the country that do you think sometimes that children's rights should take precedence over a mother or a father's right to discipline their child?
Certainly, I think children's rights do need to take precedence, because when you look at it, children are young. It is actually incumbent upon us as adults to ensure that their rights are realized. A 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old, yes, they do have rights. But how realistically can those young people actualize or realize their rights? So it is very important that we look at their rights as being paramount, and that we actually look at what are our responsibilities as parents, as carers, as teachers, as government, as community members, to actualize those rights for our children.
And then, of course, there's the religious freedoms that come into play. There's a verse in Scripture in the Bible that says, if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. How do you balance the religious freedoms that the parents have to exercise their religion and discipline the child with a cane or with maybe a hand, a smack on the bum? How do you balance those religious freedoms with the child's rights?
I think that is really very difficult, and those are challenging arguments that are being investigated and analyzed, not just in South Africa but internationally as well, because whilst we have those verses within the scriptures that some people aspire to, some can also give us other verses that will give us a different form of discipline that can be engaged, which does not necessarily involve spanking or hitting. Because, you know, we need to look at, in most cases, as you said, parents love their children, but they are faced with challenges and lots of stresses around them. So parents will then move to a point where, out of anger, out of desperation and distress, they hit the child to a point of causing bodily harm. But also, as we say, the messages that are being sent to a young person is that if you don't do what I tell you to do, then I'm going to hit you. And young people and children will then do the same with their peers, with their friends. And then we also just think, what is going on to our society? Why are our children being so aggressive? So while we respect those religious kind of backgrounds, we need to also be realistic and investigate really within our context. What does it mean? Indeed. And how can we do things differently?
Thank you so much for your time. The National Executive for Childline South Africa, Dumisile Nala, thank you. And indeed, parents need to arm themselves and inform themselves with the relevant tools that they can use instead of corporal punishment, if that is an option for them. Consider things like timeout, taking away privileges. Those are just some of the tools that we've been given to try and mitigate or deal with the young ones and make sure that they are disciplined and grow to be adults who contribute positively to our South African society.